In our last lesson, we focused on the problem of human sin, concluding that ever since the fall, all human beings have been hopelessly lost, corrupted and guilty, separated from fellowship with God, and condemned to die for their wickedness. Today, our attention turns to the solution for this problem. Soteriology is the doctrine of salvation, God's plan to rescue human beings from their predicament. Our previous conversation on sin established the need for salvation quite clearly. On one hand, we have God's complete holiness. He is utterly perfect. Your eyes are too pure to approve evil, and you cannot look on wickedness with favor, says Habakkuk 1:13. On the other hand, we have humans in their complete depravity. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, Romans 3:23. The math just doesn't add up. Humans are separated from their Creator because they are sinners, and He cannot overlook sin. There is a chasm between us and God. Moreover, Scripture teaches us that human beings are completely unable to do anything about their predicament. Ephesians 2:1 teaches that we are dead in trespasses and sins. According to Romans 8:8, those who are in flesh cannot please God. No matter how hard we try, we cannot gain His favor. There is nothing we can do to save ourselves. Any hope of salvation must start with God. This leads us to one of the most important questions in the doctrine of salvation, the question of Monergism or synergism. This question focuses on who is responsible for our salvation. On one hand, we have the idea of Monergism. Salvation is an act of God alone. You can hear the word mono, meaning one. Salvation is a one-sided affair. This idea is supported by verses like Titus 3:5. He saved us not because of works done by us in righteousness, but because of His own mercy. Clearly, from this perspective, salvation is something that only God does. On the other hand, we have the idea of synergism, or a cooperative effort between God and humans. The prefix syn means with. We are working together with God for salvation. Before you declare this idea to be absolute heresy, consider ideas like Philippians 2:12. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. This would suggest that we have a part to play in the salvation process. So, which is it? To answer this question, we must be aware of what we will call the tenses of salvation. The idea of being saved in Scripture is a very complex topic with many different aspects. In many ways, this is an oversimplification of the concept, but it is quite helpful for beginning theologians to boil the idea down to three basic tenses. First, there is the past tense of salvation, sometimes summarized under the concept of justification. This is what happens the moment we place our faith in Jesus. At that moment, we were saved forever from sin's penalty, which is death. It is said and done in our past. But let me ask you a question. Do you still sin today? Of course. That's because there is a present tense to salvation. In this sense, we are still being saved from sin's daily power in our lives. This is what Paul was talking about when he told us to work out our own salvation. It doesn't happen automatically. It requires our participation, as we'll see next week. Finally, there is a definite sense of future to our salvation as well. It has not yet been realized. We are still waiting for the day when we will be glorified with God in heaven, delivered from the very presence of sin. So salvation is a complicated, lifelong process. Parts of it are done by God alone, and other parts require our participation. Now that you understood the different tenses of salvation, you can grasp the importance of paying attention to context when you encounter the topic of salvation in the Bible. When we read the word saved, our minds tend to jump straight to the concept of eternal salvation from sin and death. But this is not always correct. Sometimes when the Bible talks about being saved, it is simply talking about salvation from trials or distress in life. 1 Timothy 2:15 has confused plenty of young Bible students because it talks about how women will be saved through childbearing. What? I need to have babies in order to be saved? No, Paul is not talking about eternal salvation here. He is talking about the physical pain of labor and delivery, not the eternal destiny of the soul. Salvation in the Bible can also refer to salvation from physical death. For example, during a storm at sea in Acts 27, Paul instructed the sailors, "Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved." The eternal destiny of their souls did not depend on staying on board the ship, but their physical safety certainly did. Similarly, in Matthew 10:22, Jesus makes the statement, "And you will be hated by all for my name's sake, but the one who endures to the end will be saved." This verse could cause you to wonder if it might be possible to lose your eternal salvation if you do not endure to the end, keeping the faith until death. But if you look at the context, this is not what Jesus was talking about. He was talking about physical death in the context of intense persecution, not spiritual death. Of course, Scripture also discusses salvation in the context of salvation from sin. But even here, as we have already seen, there are a few different aspects involved. Sometimes it is talking about salvation from sin's penalty, the present tense of salvation. This is the idea in Ephesians 2:5, which says, "By grace you have been saved." 1 Corinthians 15:1-2, on the other hand, is focused on the ongoing present tense of salvation from sin's power in our lives. You are being saved if you hold fast to the word I teach you. Holding fast to the word is what allows us to overcome sin's power in our daily lives. Finally, 1 Corinthians 3:15 has the future tense in view. Salvation from sin's very presence. Speaking of the judgment that believers will face when Jesus returns, Paul says, "If anyone's work is burned up, he will suffer loss, though he himself will be saved, but only as through fire." The things we do in life have eternal significance, not for our eternal salvation, but for the rewards we will receive in heaven. Even if we live a completely terrible Christian life, Paul affirms that we will still be saved and enter the kingdom, but we will experience loss of reward. So these examples remind us of the importance of paying attention to context when studying salvation in the Bible. A great number of doctrinal errors can be avoided if we simply consider the context of what is being said.